Hi, this is Robin, and this is the second part of my workshop on how to relight photos with the lens flare and lighting effects filters in Photoshop. And this is part two of the workshop. This video, I'm going to focus on how to work with Photoshop's lighting effects filter. Now, what I would suggest though is that you check out the early section of part one of this workshop to hear what I had to say about Adobe's plans to discontinue the 3D features in Photoshop. And I mention that because lighting effects is considered part of those 3D features. So in the first part video, I offer some contingency options for what you can do if you want to keep working with these lighting effects filters after you see what they can do for you. I also mentioned some alternative assets that you might want to investigate in that video. And then what I'll do is I'll put a link to that video in the description below this one so that you can find that part one video easily and find the information that I'm talking about. The part one video is focused on the lens flare filter and how to use it. In this part two video, we're going to work with Photoshop's lighting effects filter. So the lighting effects filter contains 17 different lighting setups and styles in the form primarily of presets. It has 3 different lighting types: the spotlight, the point light, and infinite light. And then it also has a variety of settings that you can use to adjust in a properties panel. So this filter actually has its own separate user interface from this standard Photoshop interface here that we start out in. And then plus the lighting effects filters interface gives you the ability to save your own custom lighting effects presets. So if you have something that you either have a bunch of images with a similar kind of a setup, or you think you just might like to use the setup after you take a while getting it together, then you can save it as a preset and reuse it on other images if you want to. It's sort of the moral equivalent of setting up a bunch of lights in a studio and not wanting to have to rearrange them every time you put something new into the studio if you're going to do a similar kind of setup. So you can do a digital lighting setup and then save it as a preset. Now, a few things to think about before we get into the demo and the tour of that interface that I said is different than the one we're in right now. First of all, do's and don'ts for using the lighting effects filter. So first of all, images must be 8-bit. They must be RGB, and you cannot work with a transparent layer. So you can't have a transparent or empty launch layer and go into the lighting effects filter with that. The lens flare filter that I showed in part one, you can work with either 8-bit or 16-bit images, but not so with the lighting effects filter. It must be 8-bit. So if your image starts out as 16 or 32-bit, what you must do is convert it to an 8-bit image. And what you would do is come to the top of the interface over here in the upper left, where I'm taking my highlighter here, to the image menu. Come down to where it says mode, and then first of all verify that if it's for some reason your lighting effects filter isn't lighting up and not being accessible, make sure you have an RGB image and make sure it's 8 bits. And I'm just going to click on 16 just so we can see what happens here. Okay, keep in mind that after you add whatever lighting effects you want and then save back to the regular Photoshop workspace, you can always come back to image mode and then change it back to 16-bit just like it. So you can save your image as a 16-bit even if you have to convert it to an 8-bit to work in this filter. Okay, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that this lens flare filter and the lighting effects filter are both destructive. So in Photoshop terms, that means it will alter the pixels in your image. And if you want to be able to make changes to your image, make tweaks, whatever, and not have something get baked in so you can't go back to it and make changes as you'd like, then what I would highly suggest you do is convert your starting image from your layers panel, what I'm going to call the launch layer image, to a smart object, and then that will give you the ability either to mask parts of the filter out, to go back in and make changes and tweaks and then resave and then come back again. So that to me is kind of your first thing to think about and do, is convert your image to a smart object before going into this lighting effects filter. Now for this video and for the demos, I'm just going to work with this single image this time. I think there's enough to look at without trying to do multiple images. So let's just get this set up for the workflow to be non-destructive before we go into that interface. Okay, so again, I have my background layer open for this image in my layers panel. At the bottom of the layers panel, you can drag, click and drag to the add new layer icon, the box with the plus, to get a background copy. So you've got a copy you can work with, you're not altering the original. Alternatively, you could click on this background layer and click Control or Command and J and jump that up. You'll get the same ultimate effect. Once you have this duplicate layer, that's when you want to convert that to a smart object. So you just slide over to an empty space on that active layer, right click, and come down to where it says Convert to Smart Object, left click, and you'll get this little icon in the lower right corner of the thumbnail that lets you know that now that's a smart object. So you're ready to go into the lighting effects filter. To do that, we come over to the filter menu up at the top of the interface, click on that, come down to where it says render. So it's part of the render menu. Come to the flyout and what happened here? Just what I said. It's grayed out, you can't use it. So that's what I said. I just want to simulate that happening so that if that happens to you, you don't think it's broken, okay? So if you get that grayed out, stop what you're doing, come back to the image menu mode, and just be sure you have an RGB and an 8-bit. Oh no, it's 16-bit. So left click on 8-bit, wait for Photoshop to do its thing, then come back and let's try again. Filter, render, and now lighting effects is accessible and usable, so left click on that. So now, as you can see, we have been taken into a new interface. So this is the lighting effects filter interface, and it tells you right there that that's where we are. So let me start with a tour of the interface before we actually start working with the lights, just so you know what you have to work with. So just like in the regular Photoshop workspace, we have an options bar with different tools and choices of things that you can use here. So starting from the left, we have presets. And if you come over to the box associated with presets and click on that little down arrow, you'll see that there's a whole series of pre-made preset lighting setups. So this is sort of like a soft white light in the studio lighting. You can have crossing spotlights. You can have 5 spotlights facing down or up. You get a flashlight, a floodlight. So, you know, they have a variety of things to help you already get started with more complex setups than what something like this would offer. As you come down to the bottom of that box, you'll notice that here's what I said. You can save your own presets if you want to. So if I just click on that word save, so pretend I have multiple lights all set up here, and I want to save it as a preset so it gets added to the set that comes with Photoshop. Left click on that, you'll get this pop up, and then in this hierarchy, whatever you are, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows, you have the ability to change the name here. Okay, do not alter the .ple extension. Just change the name to whatever you want it to be, and I suggest you make it descriptive. So here I had already created one called down and angled. Okay, and you can see I've got my initials. I have 3 spotlights down and they're all angled, and it's got that .ple extension. Once you get the name that you want, hit save. I'm not going to do that because I'm not saving anything right now. And then once you have saved, when you come back to this presets box and custom box, you can either load the preset that you saved by hitting load, or if you look down here below the word custom, you can see that the one I already saved is there. So all you would have to do is click on that. And again, I'm not going to use it for this image, but just to let you know, that's how you can access your presets. Okay, so let me click off of that. All right, the next thing that we come to in this is the different types of lights. There are 3 different types of lights that we have available here. So we have a spotlight, a point light, and an infinite light. The next symbol that we have here, it's like the usual undo kind of a symbol, but you can see that there's a little light bulb next to it. So that will let you reset the current light that you're working with if you're not happy with how things are going with it. I always leave preview checked on so that I can see what's happening with the lights. Otherwise, it's not going to be very helpful to you. If you decide that you just want to abort and just go back to the Photoshop interface, you can click cancel. If after you've gotten a whole bunch of lights set up and have like the look of what you've created here in this interface workspace, then just click OK to accept and send what you've created back to the Photoshop workspace. As we move over, continuing the tour, you can see we have a properties panel here for the lighting effects. And again, so now if you come to this dark box here and click on that little down arrow, you can see the 3 different types of lights that we have to work with. So these are like the building blocks for all of those presets. So they're all just comprised of using one or more of these in different ways. Okay, so anything you need to build your own presets can be built from these 3 sets of lights. So there is the point light, the spotlight, and the infinite, and I'll go through each of these to show you what they do. Okay. Also, besides all these different settings that we have, in terms of the intensity or brightness, the hotspot, which is only applicable to a spotlight. The colorize will let you, oops, let me get color off of that. I just want to work with white lights here. Up. There we go. So you have an intensity slider, which is for brightness. The exposure slider lets you open up shadows, and you can very easily blow out highlights with that, but that's what the exposure is going to be affecting. Gloss and metallic let you either add more or less light reflections to materials in the scene. And then ambience is just another way of saying ambient light. So the light that surrounds your subject or your whole scene is what this ambience slider is. I am not going to be addressing the texture slider and the texture capabilities in this lighting effects panel. You'd need to work with grayscale bump maps and things like that. There's more than enough, I think, here just right now to work with the lights without getting into dealing with 3D textures. So I'm going to skip over that. And then just to point out that there is a lights panel, so you can see that we have, based on this box here, a point light and a widget for a point light in the workspace, that this is telling you that that's what's in the workspace is a point light, okay? And that's what's active because it's highlighted. And just know that when you get multiple lights, you can turn the eye visibility off and only be working with one light at a time if you want to. Also, at the bottom of the lights panel, let's say you get you've added a bunch of extra lights using these lights up here to this setup, and you decided, oh, I really didn't want that extra spotlight, or I really didn't want that extra point light, because you can use multiples of each. Then just be sure that you're highlighting the light you want to get rid of, and then you can either right click on it and delete, or click on this little trash can and that'll get rid of it. Just know that it will not let you get rid of all the lights. You always have to have at least one light in this lights panel. Okay, so let me start showing how to work with these things now that I've gone through the tour. So since the point light is the first one that's available here, let me just talk about that a little bit and show how to work with it. So the point light, which this is a widget that represents the point light. And the point light is like a light bulb or a fill light. So you can change its location, you can change its intensity or brightness right there on that slider, but not its direction. So just like a light bulb, it's multi-directional. It'll cast light in all directions. And as you can see, unlike a spotlight, there's no hotspot, so there'd be no adjusting the hotspot slider for the point light. You can change the color of the point light. Now, the way to move this around, see if you can see with my green highlighter that I'm moving here, as I'm hovered inside the perimeter, that green perimeter, you can see it says move. So if I click, I can drag this point light wherever I want it in the scene, okay? You can also click on this center little circle and move it around that way. I usually just click inside the green perimeter and move it that way. So I'm getting this, I don't know how well you can see the screen, but even though this is dark, her head is in that area. Now, if you want to control the brightness or the intensity, you can click, I'm over on the right in the properties panel on the handle for intensity, and more to the right is brighter, more to the left is darker, okay? So that's one way to do that. And as I said, you can put a color on that. And adjust the color intensity. So this would be kind of like putting a gel on a light. All right. So I'm going to take that color off because I don't want it to have to be on all of the lights. Okay. So far we've moved it around, we've adjusted the intensity and found that by clicking on this color picker, we can add a light gel, a color gel. Also, if you look on this center little circle and see this white area, this little white ring, if you pull on that, you can make it larger or smaller. It's doing the same thing as adjusting this slider to the right. So you can adjust it in either place, either locally on the widget or on this intensity slider. So you can choose. The other thing is if you're looking and saying, well, gee, that's great, but I don't want my point light to be that big. And what you do is what just happened there. You hover over the green perimeter with your, there you go. Then if you turns to yellow and it says scale. So then you just depress, I'm working the mouse, so you would just depress it and hold it and make it smaller or larger depending on where you want your point light to be shining a light. Okay, so if you want to control it to a very limited area, you would make it smaller. If you want it to be in a much bigger area. And I must say, I don't know if it's my mouse or just this, and that's why Photoshop is no longer supporting the 3D stuff, so it's getting a little bit less stable over time, and that's why I said to look at my part 1 video, which talks about how to deal with that. Okay, so there is the point light, and you can drag it in and out to resize that. So that's the first type of light. Coming back over here to our properties panel, clicking that down arrow, I'm going to leave the spotlight to last because there's more settings and adjustments to it, so I want to end up with that. So looking at the infinite light, if you click on that, you can see that first of all, not only does it show up infinite light there, in the lights panel at the bottom, it is showing infinite light here now. So it's showing a different setting. And you also notice that the widget has changed for the infinite light. Now, unlike the point light, which I said is sort of like a light bulb and is multi-directional in terms of where it casts light, the infinite light is like a distant light source. So it's sort of acting like the sun. And what it does is it will cast light across an entire plane of your image, just like the sun would. So you can adjust the direction of this. If you click in the center like I just did and pull out, you'll see there's like this little knob and this rod that goes into the light. And then watch where the direction of light is with this little white part of the widget here too. And so you can twist and say, where do I want the light? See how it's affecting where the light is coming from and where it's showing. So you can affect the direction of the plane of light that is showing. And again, you can use this inner white ring to say how bright or how dark that's going to be, but you could also use the intensity slider. You can also use the exposure slider for the brightness or darkness, opening up the shadows or brightening the highlights. So you have some flexibility there. This too can be colorized. So I would say probably since it's a white light, I would use the exposure slider and the colorize box if you wanted to change the light in the scene. So I will just not do that for now, but just to let you know that use that and a color, and then you can make, with the exposure slider, the color as dark or as light as you like. And actually this is another way, besides using a color lookup, to do a day for night kind of look if you wanted, if you went in here and chose a blue and then made it look dark. Okay, now the colorizing and the exposure also work with the ambient light for this. So if you pull the ambient light so that it's brighter or darker, it will affect how intense the color is in here. And I realize that's what I said, this gets a little complex, but I'm sort of giving you the tour of where things are, and then you can play with it in your image. Okay, so that is that part of this. And now we want to finally go to the spotlight, because I think that's what I want to work with for this image versus these other two that are more multi-directional. I wanted to, or more unilaterally covering the image. I wanted to work with the spotlight a little bit for this image, because the spotlight, and let me come over here to the right panel and choose the spot, which means spotlight, is very directional. You can see based on the widget, it's very controlled where it's going. It's like what you see in a play where they put that bright light on somebody on the stage. So with the spotlight, again, you can control, and again, you'll see spotlight there and spotlight in the lighting panel. So you can use your intensity slider handle to say how bright it is. So if you want, you can see what kind of effect you can get. Just like the other, like the point light, you can click inside and reposition this. Okay, and then you can also rotate and distort this. So there's 4 handles on this outer oval. So if you wanted to make this a bigger spot or stretch it out, you can do that. So any of these 4 handles lets you rotate it. You can rotate it in any direction that you want for however you want to light your scene. I have a window up here, so I think I'll probably do mine like that. But what are you noticing? As you scale this, it's also changing the size of the hot spot. So if you stretch it out like I'm doing, and then find that your hotspot isn't as big as you want it to be, then you can adjust this hotspot slider over here in the right properties panel. Here you go, watch the image. I'm pulling the hotspot slider to the right, and you can see you can make it larger or smaller. Okay, and again, I've already done some adjustments with the intensity slider. Again, you can work with this little white ring inside if you want to work there versus on the intensity, or another word for intensity is brightness slider. You can also work with the exposure slider, and but look what happens. So you have to keep an eye on, for your image, you might want a burned out look like that. So you have to just decide, and basically you're balancing. It's like, I can't give you a formula for how to use these things. You're just experimenting and trying different approaches to get the look that you want with this. So that hotspot slider will change the size of the hotspot in the spotlight. I've already mentioned that the exposure slider lets you work with the shadow and highlight detail and then colorize the scene overall. So in this context, color here up on the intensity slider is like putting a color gel on a spotlight. And then colorize lets you more globally in your scene colorize the whole scene. So that's what the difference is between color. So think of this as like a gel for the spotlight, and colorize is more like a ambient, overall, more universal color that you can adjust. Okay. The gloss slider controls how much surfaces reflect the light. So what I find is it tends, if you watch the image, it tends to add kind of a haze to my images. So you can decide if you like that effect as sort of a dreamy kind of a soft look or not for your image. So I'll leave that on a little bit for mine. The metallic slider actually can tamp down some of the overly bright areas. So if you want, look here at the hot spot up here, and then as I pull the metallic slider, it can take it down a little bit so it's a little less harsh. So again, you would just have to decide for yourself and for your image, you know, how you want to balance these sliders and how you want to use them. And then again, the ambient slider or ambience is the ambient light in the room. So if you don't just want it to be this dramatic and this concentrated light, then you can open up the light in the room to bring back more of the room light with your ambient slider. So there you go. So you can get some emphasis on your subject and make it stand out from the rest of the room with that. And then you can just, again, you adjust one thing, then you can adjust the other and decide how you want to isolate your subject, for instance. Okay, so that's how I've moved all my lights, sliders with the spotlight in order to get it to a place that I like. So let's say, okay, I like the spotlight where it is, but this is still kind of a little dark over in this part of her ear. I mean, there would be typically fall off from a spotlight, and that's what you're basically controlling with the hot spot. But let's just say we don't want to lose all the detail with her feet and legs there and crossed legs. So we want to add a point light to this. So we've got our spotlight as our base. To add another light, we come over to the options bar. And as I said, the first one is the spotlight. And if you hover, you'll see what they are. The one that looks like a little incandescent light is a point light. So I'm going to add a point light to the scene by left clicking on that light bulb icon. And there we go. So now we have the point light widget added to this. If you look in your lights panel to the right, we have not lost the spotlight. It's still there. We've just added a point light to this. What I typically like to do is turn off the eye visibility and then make sure the light I'm working with is highlighted in blue. So again, this is a little bigger than I want to work with. So I'm going to hover over the green perimeter and see if I can make this a little bit smaller. I don't think I really need to get all of that. See if I can add a little bit of brightness. And you can see this goes a lot further than the spotlight. Here's the spotlight. If I want to activate that, I can click on that widget or I can click over here. Okay, so now we have both. And with both of those lights active, we can come back over here and let's just see what we've got. I'm clicking the preview check mark off and on. So you can see, are you getting the look that you want by clicking that preview on and off? And I'm feeling pretty good about this because we're getting her isolated from the space. We still have a sense of what's going on in the room. If you want to get a little moodier, I mean, again, you have to decide for your own taste and for what you want to accomplish what kind of look you want, maybe. And again, maybe this is something you want to stretch out more so you're not getting that harsh spotlight look on the wall, because it is going to give you a spotlight look on the wall. Okay, so that is that. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate how to use, so again, before I get to I'm not going to demonstrate the presets, just mention, you can add more of these point lights and more spotlights, or even the infinite light if you want to this. There's not a limit of, how many, well, there's an ultimate limit, but you're not stuck with just one or two lights. You can add more lights that you want to it, and they'll all just keep showing up, and you will be working with the light that is lit up and highlighted in the lights panel. So if you want to make any adjustments or tweaks to them, you do have to be sure, like let's go say again, we want to work on the point light. Either I can click on the widget for it here, and there it's active again, and then you can see it's highlighted there, or you can just click on the name in the lights panel to work with it. Okay, so let me say I'm happy with working with those two lights and accomplishing what I wanted to on my example image, and you can, as I said, use as many lights as you want. I'm not going to show how to use all of these different presets because all they are, as I said before, is comprised of these 3 lights. And somebody has gone to the trouble of putting a bunch of these lights together and then creating presets from them. So any of these presets you can modify to your own taste once you open them by working with the individual lights, just like I showed here. So I just want to let you know that. But the other important thing to keep in mind is that if you add one of these presets after you've been spending a lot of time getting your image just the way you like it, you're going to wipe this out because the preset will overwrite what's in the workspace. So I would say that if you want to think about using a preset, start with the preset and then customize it and add to it or take away from it. Don't go to all the effort of building up a look that you really love and then say, well, let me just see what this Omni will do to it, because it'll take everything away and it'll add your preset from there. So I just want to repeat that a couple times so that you don't lose anything after all your hard work. So again, if I wanted to save this, I could come to this presets, down arrow, come down to where it says save. I'd give it the name spot and I don't know, spotlight and point light angled. And then I would save that, and then that would be added to my list here. I'm not going to bother to do that. So let me say I'm happy with what I've accomplished here. So I want to accept it back to my Photoshop interface. Click OK. And there we are back in the Photoshop layer stack. So this is the, let me label this, output from lighting effects filter. Okay. And it's on that smart object layer. So by creating the smart object before we went into that destructive filter, what we get when we come back is not only the output that shows us what was created, but we get a mask. And if we click on that mask, like I'm left clicking on it right now, you see that it becomes active with the white frame around it. You can use your paintbrush tool, looks like a brush, from your toolbar. Yours might be on the left, mine is docked right. And if you want to paint away any of the effects, so let's say maybe this is too much for you, here, then you could paint that away by using black on that layer. Okay, so on that mask layer. You also, because this little word lighting effects is here, you can double click on that and go back into the lighting effects filter if you want to make some changes. So let's try that. Double click on that and you can see we're back here in the interface. So let me turn off the point light here for a minute and just work with the spotlight. So as I said, we can treat the spotlight with a color just like as if we were putting a colored gel over a spotlight in a photo studio, or actual studio. So let me maybe add some red to her. Okay, and click OK. So you can see we can affect the intensity or the brightness of that color. We can still impact the exposure of that. Now, if we want to add some more colorization to the rest of the image, we can click on this color picker here. And let's say, what do I want? So this is for the ambient color. So this is for the rest of the room. Let's just do blue since it's here. And it maybe will be easy to see if I do that. By the way, in addition to the color picker, if you look here in this color picker box, you can also go to color libraries. If you click on that, you can see there's all these different types of color books that they have. They no longer, unfortunately, have Pantone. It's not supported anymore. But there are all sorts of different subtle, interesting colors. If you get here and you say, oh no, what did I do? I wanted to go back and be on the color picker, then just click on the button that says picker. Okay, so let me say, okay, that I want to add blue as my ambient color. And then with the ambient slider, since that's affecting the rest of the image, you can bring it up and you can see how now we've got the red gel on her We've got some blue in the ambient light that's surrounding her. So again, you can think of different ways. And again, when you combine these different lights, you can put different gels on different ones. You can isolate different things in your image by changing the ambient and the gel. I mean, just to show you that, you don't have to be limited. You can put any kind of colored gel on her. Okay, so let's say, all right, we've made the changes that we want. I like it much better with some color on her and some color on the ambient, which is the ambient color, which is affected by colorize. Let's click OK. And we'll just go back to that same output layer. And again, you can keep going back in if you want to by double clicking on the word lighting effects. So that was what I wanted to show you for the lighting effects filter, which again, you get to through filter, render, lighting effects from an initial point. And I hope that's, sparks some ideas of ways you can use it and creative things that you can do with the lighting effects. I mean, definitely, it gives you a different look than your starting image. So you can you can use it very subtly and enhance a straight image to just make certain things stand out without somebody looking at your image saying, oh, what did they do there? It just kind of becomes a subliminal kind of thing, I guess is the word I'm groping for here. Or you can go very creative and very out of the box with this. So it's just really up to what you want to try to achieve. So I think you have an opportunity with both this lighting effects filter and the lens flare filter that I showed in the previous video that I've discussed and demonstrated in parts 1 and 2 of this workshop to relight your images in any way that you want using Photoshop. And I think if you captured it well in the field or in the studio, it can just become a subtle extra pop to your images. So I hope you have fun playing around with this or experimenting with it. If there was anything that wasn't clear and you need some clarification, maybe just put a question in the comments below the video and I'll answer your question for you if I can. So have fun exploring with relighting your images and being creative, and I'll see you next time.